Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third lecture in Chapter 13, The Age of Chivalry. So, in the last two lectures, we took a look at what some of the causes were, or the effects, really, of the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the rise of the Frankish Empire under people like Charles Martel and Charlemagne. And then we looked at what happened directly after that and kind of across Europe during this period of the development of the feudal system. Now we're going to actually look at the Age of Chivalry and kind of more of kind of looking at more of the social structure that kind of works within that instance. All right, so here we go. So during the medieval period, we get a new type of soldier, and we call them knights. You guys or at least you're familiar with them. Their origins come from Charles Martel, from his victory over the Muslims at the Battle of Tours in 732. And it comes from Charles Martel because of the nobility that he used within his army, the specialist soldiers that he used, and so forth. Now, there's several improvements that are made in terms of weaponry over this period of time that actually help knights be even more effective. One, they have leather saddles. It gives them a firm seat to fight from. You also have stirrups that are that developed during this period, or added on, or are improved upon, depending on which group you're looking at. And it gives them the ability, not only when you combine it with the firm leather saddle, it gives them a strong platform to fight from and handle heavier weapons while on horseback. And when we think about the knights themselves, we think about the big heavy swords or lances that they carry. Plus, you have to think about the armor that carries them as well. And knights are going to be used as very fearsome, decisive soldiers. They're really mostly used as shock weapons. They might be held back in a fight and used at a strategic moment to break a formation. They can fight mounted or on foot. Typically, we kind of think of knights fighting on horseback as the traditional sense, but they could be fighting either on foot or by horse. But they were typically used as that shock weapon to break the opposing forces. This is actually this is a very famous piece of artwork. This is from the Bayeux Tapestry. This is a section of depicting the Norman victory over the English forces in the Battle of Hastings in 1066. All right, so we've talked about feudalism in the past lecture. We've done some activities in class with it, read some things about it, and so forth, and written about feudalism, or will be writing about feudalism here in the future. So you need to understand the role of the knight in the feudal world. So one of the reasons why, actually the main reason why the feudal system developed is because of the breakup society due to the dangerous world that was out there, the invasions coming in from people like the Vikings or the Huns or Visigoths or whoever. So people needed a form of protection. So kings, lords, nobility start to raise armies of knights. And you'll see a similarity within this creation here with the knights with what we talk about in terms of the history of Japan and what that nobility did to raise a protecting force, which we know as the samurai. So there's a similarity there. Now, we've talked about how who gets what in the feudal system. Think back to the triangle showing where the power is, who does what within the actual system. The knights are typically those, they're going to receive land or a fief in exchange for military service / protection for the lord and or the king. Okay, and the wealth they get is typically going to come from their fiefdom, their land they get here, and that's going to pay for their military lifestyle. Now, obviously, they can gain wealth from like tournaments and stuff that we'll talk about here a little bit later, or certain services, other certain services. But typically, that's where the most knights' wealth is going to come from. It's going to come from the land that they're granted by their lord or king for military protection. Now, typically, knights have, under the system, they have obligations of about 40 days of service per year, or did, where they would fight in wars, be a protective person, during a trip or something like that. But typically, they would work directly for their lord or king for about 40 to 50 days a year, depending on who it was, and when and where. Now, how did knights practice? Keep their skills up if they weren't actually fighting in war. Wrestling was actually a sport they would undertake, and then as well hunting as well, to keep those military skills fresh. Now, there's this picture of what we call the ideal knight. Okay, from many stories have told about it. We'll talk about a few of them here moving forward. Is that there's this ideal knight that is supposed to be this person that defends those that are weak, protects the good, and destroys the bad. And basically, it comes from what is known as the code of chivalry. And the lord is supposed to, or a lord or knight, is supposed to do these things. One, they're supposed to protect their feudal lord. So they're driven to protect the direct person that they protect within the system. Okay, so like if one of you are one of my knights and I call for your protection, you're supposed to protect me as your lord. Okay, does that make sense? Two, they're supposed to protect their heavenly lord. So in this case, we're talking about Christian Europe. They're protecting God. So this is going to become a main driving force when the Crusades happen. We'll talk a little bit more about them in chapter 14, that they're supposed to protect God. And that will be used in terms of driving people to go to the Holy Land, driving knights to go to the Holy Land to protect their religion. And then three, they're supposed to protect their chosen lady within their life. Okay, so you protect your feudal lord, you protect your heavenly lord, and you protect your chosen woman. You also have the duty under the ideal knighthood to defend the weak and the poor. Now, this one's important because this is what kind of shows and connects to that idea of chivalry along with the chosen lady. But if you look in history, typically we see that knights themselves, this is kind of the problem area. A lot of knights actually don't necessarily do this, and if they do, they're very inconsistent. They're they can be very brutal. They can actually destroy the weak and steal from the poor in a lot of cases. One of the reasons why the Crusades was undertaken, outside of just protecting the Holy Land, which was the main goal, was to try to get these basically ruffians, these knights, out of Europe and use them against in a more constructive manner. And they treated lower classes with brutality in a lot of cases. And they're supposed to be loyal, brave, and very courteous, but it's not always the case. I mean, think about when if you know somebody that gets power. Some are really good with it, great, and some are very bad with it. All right. So a knight's training, typically, this is how it would go. Only a nobleman's son could become a knight. So only people from nobility could become a knight. At a very young age, you'd be sent off to learn the chivalric code and learn the way of life from another lord, typically one just neighboring you. You didn't learn it directly from your family, straight up. So basically, at the age of 7, you would become a page. And basically, this is where you'd be a servant and you would learn the basic skills of how to fight. Then at the age of 14, you'd become a squire. And this is where you would learn the more advanced skills in fighting and become a direct servant to a knight. So you'd be with them in the field. Not necessarily, you wouldn't be fighting, but you'd be training, experiencing the everyday lifestyle, and kind of ramping up to knighthood. Kind of think about it in terms of like when you're a page, it's kind of like elementary school. When you're a squire, it's like high school, and then like you graduate high school and you go off into life, whether it's college or just working. Now you've moved on. And then right around the age of 21 or so, you'd become a knight. You'd be granted knighthood, and then you'd go off and fight or move to a different area and pay fealty to another lord and be granted a fiefdom. One of the most popular ways that knights gained money, provided entertainment, and also kept their skills up, while not directly fighting in wars in Europe or in the Holy Land, were through tournaments. And you had a lot of different local wars that were happening across Europe all through this time. There's tons of them. You'd have knights tournaments. If you've ever get a chance to go to a Renaissance festival, you can actually go watch jousting tournaments. Now, obviously, they're not going to directly do it. They're going to be much safer than what you would see in traditional joust matches back in medieval times, where they would directly go at them. Where they don't necessarily do that now for safety reasons. But you'd have tournaments if whoever knocked the first one to knock the other one off the horse and so forth would move on, and winners would be paid very handsomely by the lord or by the king or so forth. Knights are going to be your military commanders. They might not be the direct commander in the field, but they're going to be a top commander. They're going to lead armies. They're going to attack castles, and castles are going to lead to a development of different style of warfare during this time, or advancements, not necessarily a different style, but advancements in what we'd call siege warfare, because castles are very highly defensible, and you need to figure out how. People always try to figure out how to get through defenses in terms of war technology. So let's take a look at that. Page 366 in your book actually does a pretty nice job of showing a profile of this type of warfare. Gives you like a picture like this and kind of explains a few things. But you can kind of see, I want you to take a second, just like 5-10 seconds, look at how many different forms of military technology there are in this picture, both in terms of siege technology trying to starve out the defenders or get into the castle, and then also look at the defenses on the castle itself. All right. So now we're going to move on to or move back to the code of chivalry. We're going to go a little bit more in detail, like why we actually have this understanding of this ideal knight who protects the poor and keeps them safe, and is always there betrothed to their chosen lady, and this ideal knight. And it has to do with literature and art being paintings and songs and so forth. So there's all these different stories, poems, and so forth that glorify knights themselves. And you have these stories of them doing heroic deeds and going on these epic adventures and so forth. And they're really cool stories. I mean, we have, the biggest example is King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. I mean, everybody knows that story, at least in some form. And it kind of tells like them protecting the countryside and so forth, and protecting the people from barbarian invaders. I mean, I even have a picture here. This is actually from the King Arthur movie. Clive Owen playing King Arthur in this instance. Pretty decent movie. It's not obviously historically accurate. It's not supposed to be, but it's pretty good in terms of kind of showing that story, the heroic ideal of a knight and his Knights of the Round Table. There's a very famous song that depicts the ideal knights called the Song of Roland. You guys can go listen to it if you choose to. I won't subject you guys to that here, and we might play it at a later date. But they're all supposed to live under the code. Lady equals Lord, protecting both. So basically what that point is trying to make is just making sure that connection you guys understand from a few slides back here, that your chosen lady is equal to your feudal lord, and that who you're supposed to protect. They're on the same level, so you protect them in the same way. And then troubadours who are people that are singers. They go along and typically sing romantic love songs. They actually helped push this ideal of glorifying knights, because the songs they sang typically were these love ballads of knights protecting their lady. In particular, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was very well known for her beauty, was said to be the most beautiful woman in all of Europe at the time, was a subject of many of these songs. And she actually goes on to mother Kings Richard and King John in England, that we'll talk about more in chapter 14 when we talk about the Crusades and we talk about the Magna Carta. So very, very influential woman there, but she's a subject of these songs. And it's because of that idea in the chivalric code, you protect your woman. All right, just 2 slides left here. Feudal society, we're going to talk about the role of women here in these last two slides. This first one's noble women, and then the second one is peasant women. So noble women in feudal society actually could inherit estates, and the idea behind that was because their husbands are going to be knights and fighting, and they could die. So therefore, or they're going to be off on campaigns for significant periods of time. So women needed to have a role where they could actually control the estate. And they would send, as their knights were sent off to war, they would be home. And this actually left a few instances where women actually had to act as military commanders in their own feudal estates on a few instances because they were the top person there, because the nobility would be gone, and they would be the next person in line. And there was even a few times where women were actually at the head of defenses in castles and so forth because of this. You saw this more during the crusading period, because that's when you generally had more of your nobility away. But generally for noble women, life was very limited to the home or the convent if they went the religious route. Very few owned any property, if at all, or own very little property, if any at all. They might possess a little bit of an education. It just depends on when and where you're looking at this. But typically they would pretty much learn basic life skills and skills to take care of their husband and so forth. It was very generally limited life for most women during this period, even if you were a noble woman. You just had access to better things. And then lastly here for peasant women, under the feudal society versus what had preceded it, life didn't really change. And primarily it was just because it was a harsh life to begin with. And when you're a peasant, male or female, it doesn't matter. You're working very hard to try to take care and survive of your take care of your family and survive as a whole. So women are very poor. They're powerless. They receive little to no education at all. Life expectancy is not very good. Women actually suffer greatly because of birth. The threat of dying during childbirth is a significant issue during this time, regardless if you're a peasant woman or nobility. But pretty much for peasant women during this period, their life didn't change. But it's all about this one right here. Okay, endless labor and just trying to survive. All right, guys, that's all I got for you today. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Please make sure that you link this one and the traits of it here with the structure of the feudal system in Lecture 2. And I will see you guys for Section 4 here shortly for the last section of the chapter. Have a good one.